My name is Scott Schofield. I'm an assistant professor here at the Department of English at Huron University College, around us, behind us. My interests are mainly in early modern literature, especially Shakespeare. I also do work on book history, the history of the book, something we'll be talking about today, as well as work in the history and future of reading. And so all this digital apparatus around us seems on mark. So,
I'm Jessica MacDonald. I'm a fourth-year honors English specialization student at Huron as well, and I'm graduating this year.
And I'm Katie Holmes, and I'm also a fourth-year English honors specialization student, and I'm doing a history minor as well, and I'm also graduating this year.
Sure. We're gathered here to to discuss some wonderful work that I was lucky enough to be part of, but really oversee. Two research assistants, former students of mine, Jessica MacDonald and Katie Holmes. Later in January of 2016, I'll be leading an exhibition on Shakespeare in Toronto, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to work with students here at Huron on one aspect of that exhibition. This particular section that I'll be working on involves an early modern printing family known as the Jaggards. The Jaggards are famous, and especially William, for involvement with what is known as the First Folio, which is the complete plays by Shakespeare, which were published in 1623. Interesting as that is, I realized that the Jaggards did much more. And part of this project was about finding out what they produced, what they printed, and seeing the full range beyond Shakespeare and his contemporaries. And so this is where the work came about. So basically I'm going to ask a few questions of you two who were excellent in compiling information for me on the project and so on, and we'll go from here. The first is, if you could just describe, each of you, a bit of the work you did on the project.
Well, we started with the English short title catalog, and we're pulling all of the works Jaggard ever printed or published out of it. And we had put that in a Google Docs chart, and we're compiling it and getting it sort of in a way that it could be readable and usable as a collection.
And then after that, the second part of the process was kind of to figure out a way to visualize it and just to get it into a chart or a map or some sort that could make it clear to an audience, any audience that was looking at it, to be able to figure out sort of what the Jaggards were about and what they did.
So just so I'm clear, you took the material from Excel that you had as part of a Google Doc, and then started to think about how to visualize this material. On that note, I wonder what led you to the visualization you decided on? What influenced your decision? Were there models, readings, things of that nature?
Well, one of the initial models that we came across that you actually pointed out to us was in the Tufts book, Beautiful Evidence, and it was a scan on sort of genomes and human genomes. And what I found really interesting about that, and I think Katie did too, was the ability to plot multiple data points side by side and just represent them visually in colors without needing to say much. So that was sort of an early model.
Yeah, we went through a lot of different sort of research ideas with that, and I think we kind of came on that one, yeah, as Jessica said, because it was we were able to plot several things at the same time, and it gave us a way to sort of use the data, but not necessarily in like a traditional English words way, but more in like a visual graphic. So I think that helped us a lot.
Your last point, Katie, it struck me because it reminded me of something we don't typically do as English students. We rarely work with graphs and models and things like that. I wonder if you could just, either of you, comment a bit about the nature of that work, how it's different from what you're used to, and maybe what you learned in the process.
I think it was kind of interesting for me because I think there are a lot of sort of similarities between what we might do in an essay in terms of you have to mix the creativity and the analytical side, but it was just sort of putting that into a new system, or like a new way of looking at it. So I think that was interesting to me.
Absolutely, myself as well. I see the connection. It was kind of like we were building an essay, but instead of with words, the big focus for us was colors and limiting visual clutter, just like you would limit buzzwords in an essay, that kind of thing. So, representing it visually rather than in words was sort of where we were going with it.
I find this very interesting because, you know, as working with research assistants, the two of you, it seemed perfectly fine to me, even though I knew it would be strange in some ways at first. But as an assignment in a class, I wonder how it would be received. I think that would take some time and there might be some resistance. But I think it's a reminder, what you say, that these creative and analytical skills that we bring to bear on writing essays and so on can easily be transferable or transferred to other areas and other kinds of work. And design strikes me as a nice parallel. So it's very interesting. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how you worked with them, and did you feel that the digital space was enough, or did you find that you needed to work side by side?
There was definitely a need for us to meet up. I mean, we went back and forth in terms of how we were talking to each other, using Google Messenger, using text message, using email. At one point, you know, putting Post-it notes in books that we knew each other were going to take out later. But we did actually feel the need to meet up and at times work side by side. So we went back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, I think most of the time when we were meeting up, it was sort of at the end maybe of when we were finishing up certain aspects of the project or when we were starting new aspects. So it was sort of getting everything together and sort of figuring out how we were going to approach the next steps.
That's great. And as a related question would be about media. I know that part of the work was with that fun 3-volume STC, but there is value to working with that, especially volume 3 where it lists the printers and their output. Could you talk a little bit about how you worked with print and digital? And even, as you mentioned earlier, Tufte's beautiful evidence. And there's always this mix going on. How did those two things come into play when doing the work in Excel and then later, I guess, the visualization as well?
I think it was always kind of a back and forth between print and online sort of media. A lot of it was sort of trying to figure out how those two things kind of came together and we could actually work with them. Especially with the STC, we were using the short title catalog and early English books online, the online database, which was good because there you had the actual images of the different manuscripts and stuff, which I think gave it a more physical idea, so it's not just a title, you can actually see what it is. And I think with the Tufte visualization, it was sort of just figuring out how we could get that printed sort of genome data into our own, incorporating it into our own media project online.
Well, for any given entry for each of the works, we would be going back and forth between the STC as a print volume, the STC as an online volume, which had different information, and then the early English books online catalog, which was different information again, with our Google Docs. So there was always a mix of print and of online media for us in working out through each individual entry.
Excellent. And one final question on that note, and I'm sitting here with 2 Renaissance books, which are fun to have outside. They rarely see the sun, so. But I wonder, you know, even with that access to EBO, is there something, you know, when you look down at these books here, did it ever enter your mind, the physical object? Were you thinking, did you ever have that moment of imagining Jaggard at work, creating things like this?
I think your sense of scale really gets altered when you're working on web, because while the EBO can give you a scan of the page, as Katie was mentioning, it really can't give you a sense of what the size of that page was. So for a while there, we were kind of scratching our heads as to what format, which was one of the things we were compiling, quarto, folio, etc., what that size would have actually looked like and how we needed to represent it.
Great. Good. Another question that's sort of in this line is how your work on the Jaggards, and particularly their printed output, influenced, shaped your understanding of the period in any way. I'm asking that in part because I know you've both taken classes in the Renaissance, and especially on Renaissance literature, but moving away, and especially the material that is largely non-literary, we might say. How would that change if, you know, you were starting a course again in the Renaissance?
I think working with it really gave me a better idea of the sort of things that were being published, because we see literature in English, obviously, but we don't necessarily see as much. I was surprised by the religious, how much Christianity and doctrine there was in terms of they would publish sermons and things like that, but they would also be publishing things that were not things that I would think of necessarily, such as commerce and governance. There were things like miscellaneous documents on horsemanship and things like that that you don't necessarily see. So I think it does give you a better idea of the history of the time period.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a real shift of focus for me, because usually in English our focus is on the literary and on the authors. Working with Jaggards as a publisher was really a sense of Elizabethan thought and where they were going through, because you could see how many reprints of one edition there were, and so that was a popular text, and sort of a different sense, again, as Katie said, going into history as opposed to literature.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more. I mean, my experience too working with this material is it's making me rethink what was popular in the period, what were people reading who also went to plays, and how that might inform the way they received them, read them, and staged them, and so on. I want to go back a little bit to some of the work you were doing, and really a more general question, but what was it like collaborating with a peer from the same department? I mean, much of our work in English is individual. We write essays, hand them in, hopefully do well. But here, this was a chance for you to work with a peer at the same level, same year, and so on.
I think it was great. I had fun working with Katie. I mean, we've known each other for quite some time, because Katie was one of the first people I met when I came to Huron, the first day we were here, and so we've been reasonably close for a while, and it was a great experience working with her.
Yeah, I think it was really good too, and I think it was like a really interesting way to work with someone, because in class you often work in group assignments and things, but it might be only for a week or two. But here it was a kind of ongoing collaboration, and you got to sort of understand what each other's strengths were throughout the project. So I think that was really beneficial. Yeah.
And sort of a small follow-up to that, I wonder about working with me in a different capacity. I mean, as students in classes, there's a kind of relationship that's set up. But as research assistants, it's a bit different. It's more collaborative than it is about me teaching you and you producing work and so on. Could you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I think it was really good. I think it was kind of interesting too, because you gave us a lot of leeway to sort of take the project where we wanted to go with it, especially with the visualization. So I think that was, it was similar to what we would have in class, but it was sort of getting to do the more creative parts of it and getting to sort of take charge of it in some way. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, it was great, because we could be a little bit more responsible in terms of the parameters of where we were going. Obviously, you had a space that you wanted us to be in, but we could feel free to go in and out of that as we wanted to, in terms of what the image was supposed to look like and that kind of thing, which, that's sort of a guideline that you don't usually get to set yourself with essays.
No, and I can say, I mean, I was so impressed, not only with the work you produced in the end, the Excel list, and also the visualization, but just the, me sort of saying to you, here's what I want. Work at, your pace, do it how you wish, and you pulling off what you did. I was very impressed, so I just wanted to say that, because it really is quite impressive to see this quality of work and self-motivation, which both of you have buckets full of. Final question would be, could you see any of what you did and what you learned through this experience being applied at a later date?
I think a big part of that is sort of the detail work and the combing through, and that level of paying attention to what you're doing would be useful no matter the field. More specifically, obviously, the skills we picked up in terms of working online and working with that kind of material is equally going to be really useful for me moving into, potentially business space.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also think that as someone who's going into Master of Library Science, I think the work I've done here is probably going to be very relevant to what I do in the future, but even beside that, I think the skills you get even in problem solving and organization and things like that, I think that's really beneficial to anyone going into any field, really.
That's great. Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time to reflect on this wonderful work that you did.
Thank you.
Thank you.